Change lives.
Cambiar vidas.
Change lives.
Change organizations.
حياته.
改变世
Change
界。
organization.
Change organizations.
Transformar el mundo.
Change the world.
Before coming to the GSB, James he studied robotics and automation. He worked for BCG in a number of places, New Zealand, Australia, Chicago. He's going to be doing a summer internship. He's going to be working with Miley at Amazon and also working with a robotics medical device startup. So we're going to hear from James and some of his past experiences that got him to where he is today. Give it up for James.
So when you think of at-risk youth, who do you think of? When you hear statistics like 1 in 5 students will bring a weapon to school before they graduate, or that 1 in 18 will have to go before a judge prior to high school graduation, or that 1 in 20 will attempt to commit suicide before they turn 18. Which kids do you think of? Now, it's not uncommon when we hear these statistics to think that they're somehow extreme, that they impact a part of the population that we just simply don't belong to. Well, I'd like to tell you the story about a chair. So just down the road in Palo Alto at the West Meadows Road crossing, there's a white plastic chair by the railway lines. Now, this chair was put there by the community so that they could do shifts every single day until the very last train passes at midnight to make sure that kids weren't jumping in front of trains to commit suicide. Now, this is just one story. It's pretty extreme. But this situation was prompted after 4 students between the ages of 13 and 17 committed suicide there. I share this story to highlight how close to home the issue of troubled youth can be. The kids involved in this tragic story weren't the ones that were constantly at the counselor's office. They didn't look weird. In fact, what's scary is they looked just like any other students in their class. And remember, this happened in Palo Alto, not halfway across the country, but our own beautiful, affluent backyard. And note that the entire community put that chair there. And it wasn't just concerned parents that manned that chair. Because irrespective of whether we are or whether we intend to be parents or not, we will all belong in communities where there will be kids. And this is why the issue of at-risk youth is relevant to all of us. Now, I don't want this talk to be all doom and gloom for 12 minutes. So I want to also share that the good news is there are things, both big and small, that we all can do, actually that you can do, to really change a child's life. I want to share the story of a young boy. This boy grew up with his mother, and when he turned 9, his mother thought it would be a good idea for him to spend some time with his dad, who was living overseas. Now, what this mother and the boy did not know was that the environment that this boy was to head into with his dad and with his dad's new wife, that it would be an abusive one. So imagine the situation. We've got a young boy in a new country. He doesn't speak a word of the local language. He's in an abusive environment with no friends or family to help him out. What's a boy to do? He does what he knows to do, which is run away from it all. He runs away from home, obviously he doesn't go to school anymore, and even has to steal food in order to survive. Cops would catch this boy stealing, he'd be returned back to his family, and the whole vicious cycle would continue. That is until one day, a shopkeeper catches this boy stealing. And unlike everyone else before him, the shopkeeper decided not to call the cops, but to call his friend, who also happened to be a social worker. Now, to cut a very long story short, there is a happy ending. This one phone call meant that this boy was able to get into a stable home environment, focus on his education, and ultimately become amongst the first in his family to graduate from college. Now, I share the story to illustrate the power of one little thing in being able to change a child's life. In this story, it was that one phone call that started to change this boy's life. Now, I know about the power of a little thing in being able to take a child off the streets to be standing here in front of you today. Because that boy was me, and that story is mine, and my life was changed because of one of these little things. Now, I acknowledge that this is a big, tricky issue. It's a tough problem to solve and has hooks in societal issues such as poverty. And I also recognize that you never quite know when these little things will truly be able to change a child's life. Again, back to the good news. The good news is there are tons of great organizations that try and solve this problem in a far more systematic way. And I'd just like to highlight a couple today that I've had the fortune of being involved with. So the first is Project K. So they are a youth mentoring program based back home in New Zealand. Actually very similar to Big Brothers, Big Sisters here in the US, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. One Hope United is based in Chicago, and when I was working there, I was fortunate enough to be involved with them to help deliver a program that provides services and resources to low-income families so that they can provide a stable home environment for their kids. And in fact, right now, I'm a board fellow with a great organization based right here in Palo Alto named Peninsula Bridge. Now, for those of you that don't know, board fellows meant to help the bridge, meant to help the organization that they're with, but I think I create more homework for some of my board members than I do in helping them. But Bridge provides great summer programs for low-income, for low-resourced students so that they can be prepared to graduate from high school. Now, my own organization isn't quite ready to be plastered up here, well, if we had a screen, but I've started working towards my own organization that looks after kids not only on these various critical stages of their life, but right throughout their journey from childhood to being successful adults. Why should we do great work in middle school and pray that they'll know how to get into the best high schools? And once they graduate from high school, how do we know they can play this Derek Bolton game to get them into the best colleges in the world? I could go on and on about work in this space, and I encourage you to have those conversations, to reach out to me if you're interested. Now, I'd like to share one of my favorite stories of working with one of these organizations. Now, this might seem like a weird question to be asking right now, but who here even knew that New Zealand has national ice hockey teams? Well, we do. One particular clean team, the New Zealand Under-16 team. Now, we're not as good as the Canadians, we're not as good as the Americans, but on this particular tour, we were better than the Australians, and frankly, that's all that really matters. I want to introduce you to a boy who I was working with at Project K that really wanted to be on the New Zealand team. So meet 13-year-old Connor. So Connor came from a troubled family. He was a prolific truant and at risk of failing every single one of his classes. And I remember having a conversation with Connor partway through our mentoring relationship when I was considering moving to Chicago for work. He said, "Why do you want to go to Chicago?" And I started listing off all these reasons for why I thought Chicago would be a great place. And in hindsight, I realized how little I knew about Chicago because right at the top of the list was I thought it'd be refreshing to live in a city that snowed once in a while during winter. Anyway, so I didn't think much of this conversation. And as I alluded to earlier, Connor was an avid ice hockey player and wanted to be on the national team, but unfortunately for him, he was a bit of a shrimp. He was tiny compared to kids his age. But we worked at it, took him to practices, showed up to games when his mum couldn't make it. And then the good news came. Yes, he had made the New Zealand ice hockey team. And again, if we had a screen, I could show you how small he was relative to the rest of his team. When I heard the great news, I asked Connor, I said, mate, you were tiny compared to those guys. What made you stick through all the tough trainings to think that you could make the team? And he said, well, I heard that the next tournament was going to be in Chicago, and I knew I wanted to be there. And then I had a bit of one of those of you that are parents in here, you have those little cool moments when your kids pay you a compliment. So I had one of those. I said, wow, in my head I thought, this kid wants to come halfway around the world to be with me because I was that awesome of a mentor. And as kids do, he would burst my cool bubble right after. He said, well, I've always wanted to go to Chicago. And Connor begins listing off all these great reasons for why he wanted to go to Chicago. And you guessed it, at the top of the list was, I thought it'd be fun to visit a city that snowed a little during winter. So I want to use this story to basically show how one little innocent conversation can really help move a child towards his goal. I had that little conversation with Connor. Yes, it helped him succeed at his hockey aspirations, but actually, more importantly, it had lots of positive impacts throughout his life. That year, Connor would pass every single one of his classes. And actually, I just had to call Connor last week to make sure he was still on track to graduate from high school. And yes, we're still all green there. This story really highlights to me why I wanted to give this story highlights to me why I really wanted to give this talk today. In part, it was about raising awareness of at-risk youth. But perhaps more importantly, I want to inspire every single one of you to do something to help a child in your life. In fact, I'd like you to take a moment right now just to think through what you can do to help kids. What will be your Connor moment? I'm not going to stand up here and suggest what's a big thing for you or what's a little thing. We're GSBers, there are alumni in here, there are successful professionals in here. You're all doing great things and will go on to do even bigger things. If you want to donate to an organization, well, I think my Peninsula Bridge board members and directors wouldn't forgive me if I didn't give them a bit of plug. So peninsulabridge.org, people. Or it could be something as small as calling your niece or nephew that you haven't spoken to in a while. I know that over the last 12 minutes that I've been rambling up here, something has come up in your mind about what you can do to help kids in your life. The question is, what are you waiting for? Thank you.